It took less than 5 seconds for a perfect world to shatter, one poisoned cup of tea at a time. Imagine this. Shadowwood Manor, an emblem of staggering wealth nestled in the exclusive enclave of Silverwood Hills, home to the seemingly golden couple, millionaire Julian Thorne and his ethereally beautiful pregnant wife Clara. From the outside, it was a fairy tale. Success, love, a baby on the way. But within those hallowed walls, a venomous secret was brewing. A betrayal so audacious it would culminate in a courtroom drama that would leave the city breathless. You see, Julian, the man who seemingly had it all, was entangled in a dangerous white-hot affair with the intoxicatingly ambitious Serafina Dubois. And this wasn't just a rich man's dalliance. Oh no, this was a collision course with consequences so devastating they would nearly destroy an innocent life. What you're about to hear goes far beyond the sanitized headlines. We're peeling back the layers of opulence to reveal the raw, ugly truth of a meticulously planned revenge. How could such luxury mask such darkness? And what twisted obsession could drive a woman to methodically dismantle another's happiness, a happiness she felt was rightfully hers? Prepare yourself, because the answer is more chilling than you can imagine, and you won't want to miss a single, shocking detail of how this dream turned into an absolute nightmare. Shadowwood Manor. Even the name whispered of old money and sprawling, manicured secrets. Ivy climbed its weathered stone walls, ancient oaks stood sentinel over emerald lawns, and inside, priceless art adorned silk-lined rooms. Julian Thorne, handsome, charismatic, a titan of industry, moved through this world with an easy inherited grace. Clara, his wife, was the gentle heart of this opulent fortress, her quiet kindness a stark contrast to the often brittle society in which they moved. Her pregnancy, a long-awaited joy, seemed to cast a golden glow over everything, a promise of new beginnings. Or so it appeared. But the cracks in this gilded facade were already beginning to show, visible only to those who knew where to look, or to those who, like Serafina Dubois, were actively seeking them out. Serafina. A name that dripped with a dangerous allure. She was everything Clara was not. Bold, overtly seductive, and possessed of a ruthless, calculating ambition that burned like a cold fire in her amethyst eyes. Julian had met her at a high-profile charity gala, a fleeting encounter that had ignited a spark, then a conflagration. While Clara lovingly planned their nursery, her days filled with soft fabrics and dreams of tiny hands, Julian was increasingly drawn into Serafina's orbit, his late nights at the office becoming a convenient if flimsy excuse for clandestine meetings in discreet five-star hotel suites across the city. He knew it was wrong. Of course, he did. Guilt was a constant, gnawing companion, a bitter taste in his mouth even as he tasted Serafina's lips. But Serafina offered an escape, a thrill, a validation that, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate even to himself, he craved. She saw him not just as Clara's husband, the expectant father, but as Julian Thorne, the powerful magnate, a man to be desired, to be conquered. And Serafina, it was becoming increasingly clear, was a woman who always got what she wanted. Clara, bless her innocent heart, sensed the shift. A new coolness in Julian's touch, a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Is everything all right, darling?" she'd ask, her voice laced with a gentle, uncomprehending concern. "You seem so preoccupied." Julian would offer a strained smile, a vague reassurance about market pressures, the demands of his empire. And Clara, wanting so desperately to believe in the fairy tale, would accept his explanations, attributing his distraction to the natural anxieties of impending fatherhood. She wouldn't allow herself to imagine the truth. The truth was simply too monstrous. But Serafina saw. She saw Julian's guilt, his wavering resolve, and it only fueled her determination. She saw Clara's gentle naivety, not as a virtue, but as a weakness to be exploited. Every gushing society column detailing Clara's radiant pregnancy, every tender photograph of Julian with his hand resting protectively on Clara's growing belly, was like a personal affront, a fresh stab of the jealousy that was rapidly consuming her. Shadowwood Manor, the Thorne name, the life Clara lived so effortlessly, it should all be hers. It would be hers. As she watched them from afar, a predatory glint in her eyes, a chilling vow formed in the crucible of her ambition. She has everything I deserve, and soon, very soon, it will all be mine. The game had begun, and Serafina Dubois played to win, no matter the cost, no matter who was destroyed in the process. The perfect life was about to be shattered, and the whispers of poison were already on the wind. That chilling vow, a silent promise of upheaval, now propelled Serafina Dubois into calculated action. She wasn't merely an opportunist, a chance interloper in the gilded life of Julian and Clara Thorne. No, Serafina was a meticulous predator, and Clara, in her blissful ignorance, had just become her designated prey. The initial phase of her campaign was one of insidious reconnaissance. She became a ghost in Clara's periphery, a shadow absorbing details with unnerving precision. Julian's favorite restaurants, the charities Clara championed, even the specific blend of Earl Grey tea Clara favored each afternoon. No detail was too trivial for Serafina's voracious appetite for information. She learned the rhythms of Shadowwood Manor, the sprawling Thorne estate nestled in the opulent embrace of Silverwood Hills, as if she were studying a complex piece of machinery she intended to dismantle. How far would she go? You're about to find out. Julian, meanwhile, was a man increasingly stretched taut. He tried, with the clumsy desperation of a man drowning in his own deceptions, to navigate the treacherous waters between his serene, pregnant wife and his intoxicatingly dangerous mistress. The late nights, once explained away as unavoidable business dinners, became more frequent, the excuses thinner. Missed anniversaries of small, intimate moments that Clara cherished were met with lavish, almost offensively expensive gifts that felt more like reparations than tokens of affection. His replies to Clara's gentle inquiries about his well-being grew shorter, sometimes clipped with an uncharacteristic curtness that pricked at her tender heart. Could she sense the betrayal? Or was she too trusting? "Is everything all right, darling?" Clara would ask, her voice soft, her hand resting on his arm as he stared blankly at a financial report, the words clearly not registering. Her brow would furrow with concern. "You seem so distant lately. Is the new project weighing on you so heavily?" She'd search his face, her eyes wide with an innocent hope that he would confide in her, that this was just the stress of impending fatherhood, the weight of his vast empire pressing down. A baby, their baby. How could anything but joy surround such a miracle? This naivety, this unwavering belief in his inherent goodness, was a shield Clara held up against the creeping shadows, but it was a shield Serafina was already finding ways to pierce. One has to wonder, how long can such innocence last in the face of calculated malice? The annual Silverwood Children's Hospital fundraiser, hosted that year amidst the baronial splendor of Shadowwood Manor, provided Serafina with her first formal entree into Clara's world. She arrived on the arm of Damien Vance, a peripheral business associate of Julian's, a man easily charmed and utterly oblivious to the true nature of the woman he escorted. Serafina was a vision in a bespoke crimson gown that clung to her every curve, a stark, deliberate contrast to the softer pastels favored by the Silverwood Hills matriarchs. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, drawing attention to the predatory gleam in her amethyst eyes. She was designed to captivate, and when Julian's gaze fell upon her as she entered the grand ballroom, his breath hitched. A flicker of something, panic, desire, crossed his features before he quickly schooled them into a mask of polite surprise. He prayed Clara wouldn't notice the way his eyes lingered a moment too long. But in a room full of watchful eyes, how long can such secrets remain hidden? "Julian, my dear fellow," Damien boomed, steering Serafina forward. "I believe you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Serafina Dubois." Julian forced a smile, his hand extending automatically. "Miss Dubois, a pleasure." His voice was a shade too hearty. Serafina's laugh was a low, melodious purr, perfectly calibrated. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Thorne. Damien has told me so much about your philanthropic endeavors." She offered her hand to Clara next, her touch surprisingly firm, her nails the color of dried blood, a stark contrast against Clara's pale skin. As their hands met, a subtle, venomous glint, like the flicker of a serpent's tongue, danced in Serafina's eyes. Clara felt an inexplicable shiver trace its way down her spine, a sudden, unwelcome chill despite the warmth of the crowded room. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, the fatigue of her advancing pregnancy, a simple shiver, or a premonition of the darkness to come. Later, amidst the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of polite society, Serafina engineered a moment alone with Julian near the sweeping, ancestral staircase, its dark wood polished to a mirror sheen. She leaned in close, her perfume, a heady blend of night-blooming jasmine and something darker, more exotic, enveloping him. "This is quite the life you've built, Julian," she whispered, her voice a silken caress that nevertheless carried an edge of steel. Her eyes swept the opulent hall, lingered on a portrait of Clara, radiant, innocent, and then returned to his. "Your lovely wife, so perfect." The sarcasm was a palpable thing, coating the last word with a layer of disdain. What game was she playing, and what were the stakes? Julian exhaled slowly, the scent of her proximity both intoxicating and suffocating. "Serafina, not here. Please." His voice was a low, urgent plea. He could feel the eyes of Silverwood Hills on them, could almost hear the whispers. "Relax, darling," she murmured, her lips curving into a sly, knowing smile. "I'm merely admiring the scenery." She tilted her head, her gaze deliberately provocative. "Or am I not allowed to appreciate such domestic bliss?" He forced a tight smile at a passing grande dame, whose eyes lingered on them with undisguised curiosity. "You know this is complicated," he hissed, his composure fraying. Serafina's soft laugh was devoid of genuine humor, a chilling little sound. "Oh, I'm well aware of the complications, Julian, but I'm also a woman who appreciates ambition, and what I want, I usually get." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air between them, a dangerous undercurrent beneath the facade of the glittering event. Julian felt trapped, caught between the iron necessity of maintaining appearances and the dangerous, illicit thrill that still simmered, however much he tried to deny it. Was this a warning or a promise? The encounter, brief as it was, solidified Serafina's resolve. Seeing Clara so effortlessly ensconced in the life Serafina craved, seeing the baby bump that represented an unbreakable bond, fueled the acidic burn of her jealousy. This wasn't just about Julian anymore. It was about the status, the power, the entirety of the life Clara possessed. It was a life Serafina believed was rightfully hers. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that subtle maneuvering was no longer enough. She needed something more, definitive. But what? And how? Her mind, always a labyrinth of cunning schemes, turned to darker avenues. She recalled a name from her more colorful past in the city's underbelly, before she had meticulously crafted her current polished persona. A man known only as Silas, a purveyor of rare and often illicit botanical tinctures, a shadowy acquaintance who operated in the city's forgotten corners. Their previous interactions had been transactional, always veiled in secrecy. He was a ghost in the system, untraceable, a master of his obscure craft. Could this be the key to her twisted desires? The meeting was arranged with a single coded message. A dimly lit alleyway, smelling of damp stone and decay, far from the glittering lights of Silverwood Hills. Silas was a wraith-like figure, his face perpetually obscured by shadow and the brim of a worn hat. He didn't ask questions, only listened, his silence more unnerving than any interrogation. One has to wonder what secret such a man keeps. "I have a personal matter," Serafina stated, her voice cool and steady despite the thrumming in her veins. "I require something unique, a compound that induces slow harm, something that mimics a natural decline, for a delicate constitution." She watched his shadowed face for any reaction, but there was none. Only the faintest rustle of fabric as he reached into a worn leather satchel. What horrors lay within? He produced a small, unassuming vial filled with a colorless, odorless liquid. "This," his voice was a dry rasp, like dead leaves skittering across pavement, "is potent. Gradual. It will weaken, confuse, and in sufficient quantity, over time, erase." He named a price that would have made most balk, but Serafina merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the vial. The exchange was swift, the money disappearing into his satchel as quickly as the vial appeared in her gloved hand. No names exchanged beyond the initial contact, no pleasantries. Pure, cold transaction. A deal with the devil, some might say. Clutching the vial, Serafina felt a tremor of something akin to fear, quickly suppressed. This was a line, she knew, a dark, irrevocable line. But the scorching heat of her ambition, her insatiable hunger for what she felt was owed to her, cauterized any nascent guilt. Julian belonged with her. This was merely expediting the inevitable, correcting a cosmic error, or so she told herself. Her research into Clara's habits intensified, moving beyond simple observation into a focused study. She already knew about the afternoon Earl Grey, but what about vitamins? Herbal supplements for the pregnancy? Any particular nighttime infusions Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, Clara's physician, might have recommended? Every detail was a potential delivery system, every routine a vulnerability to be exploited. Serafina's mind, a razor-sharp instrument of manipulation, worked tirelessly, piecing together the mosaic of Clara's daily existence, identifying the precise moment, the perfect method to introduce her silent, insidious agent of change. It's terrifying how meticulous evil can be, isn't it? Later that night, alone in her opulent, sterile apartment that felt more like a gilded cage than a home, Serafina held the small glass vial up to the light. The liquid within was innocuous, like water. Yet it held the power to unravel a life, to rewrite a destiny. A faint, cruel smile, a chilling antithesis to Clara's innocent radiance, touched Serafina's lips. "Time to make some changes around here," she whispered to the silent room, the vial cold against her palm. The first, tentative steps into the Garden of Eden had been taken. Now, the serpent was ready to offer its poisoned apple. And the question lingers: who will be the first to take a bite? The vial, cold and smooth against Serafina Dubois's palm, was not just a container of liquid. It was the key to unlocking the future she so fiercely believed was her due. Her whisper, "Time to make some changes around here," still hung in the opulent silence of her apartment as she began to weave the next, more insidious phase of her plan. The first dose, she decided, needed to be a whisper of malice, undetectable, a subtle corruption of Clara Thorne's vitality. Yet, even as a whisper, the countdown to tragedy had irrevocably begun. But how do you poison someone's life without leaving a trace? Serafina, it turned out, had an answer. To execute this delicate stage, Serafina required an unwitting accomplice, an unseen hand within the formidable walls of Shadowwood Manor. Her gaze fell upon Annalise Finch, Clara's personal assistant. Annalise was a young woman with a quiet demeanor, a dreamer with a portfolio of surprisingly evocative watercolor sketches she kept hidden in her modest staff quarters. She was also, Serafina had astutely observed, lonely, somewhat underpaid for her meticulous efforts, and undeniably fascinated by the glittering, almost mythical lifestyle that unfolded daily before her eyes. Annalise was, in short, ripe for manipulation. Was Annalise just naive, or was there something more that drew her into Serafina's web? Serafina orchestrated a chance encounter at a small, exclusive art gallery in the city, a place Annalise frequented on her rare afternoons off. Feigning an interest in a rather obscure landscape artist whose work Annalise openly admired, Serafina struck up a conversation. She was charming, attentive, praising Annalise's keen eye and subtly hinting at her own, entirely fabricated connections within the art world. "You have such a unique perspective, Annalise," Serafina had purred, her eyes warm with feigned admiration. "It's a shame more people don't get to see your talent." A simple compliment, or the first thread in a carefully woven net. A lonely heart is an open door. Annalise, starved for genuine recognition, blossomed under the attention. Serafina cultivated the budding friendship with practiced ease, meeting Annalise for coffee, offering empty promises of introductions, and all the while, like a skilled interrogator, gently extracting a trove of invaluable information. Clara's preferred calming infusion of linden flower and lemon balm, prepared each afternoon. The precise timing of her prenatal appointments with Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth. The quiet hours when Clara would be resting alone in her sun-drenched sitting room or strolling through the meticulously kept rose gardens of Shadowwood. Annalise, believing she had found a glamorous confidant, perhaps even a mentor in the enigmatic Miss Dubois, who she vaguely understood to be an influential friend of Julian's with impeccable taste, divulged these details with innocent candor. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how easily trust can be weaponized. The clandestine visit was disturbingly easy to arrange. On a crisp autumn afternoon, with Annalise ensuring the household staff were occupied elsewhere, Serafina, disguised in a plain trench coat and a silk scarf artfully obscuring the lower half of her face, slipped through a secondary kitchen entrance of Shadowwood Manor. Annalise, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and a faint, unidentifiable unease, led her quickly towards the still room, a cool, fragrant space where the household's teas, herbs, and cordials were stored in neatly labeled canisters. The heart of the home, soon to be the scene of a silent crime. Mrs. Thorne's linden flower and lemon balm blend is in the celadon tin, third from the left, Annalise whispered, her eyes wide as she took in Seraphina's unusual attire. Are you sure Mr. Thorne won't mind this? Surprise? She still clung to the belief that Seraphina was perhaps planning some elaborate romantic gesture for Julian. Oh, the irony. Seraphina offered a reassuring if slightly strained smile. Julian loves surprises, my dear. And this one is very special. Her gloved hand closed around the cool ceramic of the indicated canister. Once Annalise had been dispatched on a trivial errand to another wing of the manor. To ensure everything is perfect, Seraphina had said. She worked quickly. From a tiny, almost invisible compartment in her designer handbag, she retrieved the vial obtained from Silas. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the still room. With a steady hand, she unscrewed the cap and carefully, precisely, measured a small, almost homeopathic amount of the colorless, odorless botanical tincture onto a tiny, antique silver spoon she'd brought for the purpose. The potent liquid was then gently, thoroughly, mixed into the fragrant, dried leaves of linden and lemon balm, leaving no visible trace. She replaced the canister, her breath catching in her throat. The act was done. The first die cast. The idea both thrilled and repulsed her in a dizzying wave of conflicting emotions. She was crossing a moral event horizon, a point of no return. But the image of Clara's serene smile, of Julian's hand resting protectively on Clara's burgeoning belly, solidified her resolve. This was a necessary cruelty, or so the predator told herself. The following afternoon, Clara, feeling a little more fatigued than usual, the weight of her pregnancy settling in, requested her customary infusion. Annalise, dear, would you mind preparing my linden flower tea? I think I need a moment of calm. Annalise, with a polite smile and a flutter of nerves she couldn't quite place, obliged, entirely unaware of the invisible corruption that now tainted the fragrant blend. Moments later, Clara took her first sip. She paused, a slight frown creasing her brow. This tastes a little different today, Annalise. Perhaps a new batch? A small change, a tiny ripple. Was this the poison making its first mark? I believe so, Mrs. Thorne, Annalise replied, her voice a little too bright. Clara, ever trusting, dismissed it as a minor variation, perhaps a slightly different harvest of herbs. She drank the cup, eager to soothe the jangled nerves that seemed to accompany her these days. In her sleek, minimalist penthouse across town, Seraphina waited, a coiled spring of anxious anticipation. She expected a call, a frantic report, some dramatic development. But nothing of the sort happened that day. Clara experienced a mild, throbbing headache later that evening and retired to bed early, attributing it, as she often did, to the general malaise of pregnancy. Unbeknownst to Clara, to Julian, to everyone within the oblivious sanctuary of Shadowwood Manor, a slow, insidious poison was beginning its silent, methodical work. How many more doses before someone noticed? Weeks bled into one another. The vibrant hues of autumn gave way to the starker beauty of early winter. And with the changing seasons, Clara's health began a more noticeable, more worrying decline. Her morning sickness, which had mercifully begun to subside, returned with a vengeance, leaving her weak and depleted. Dizzy spells became more frequent, sometimes so severe she had to grip onto furniture to prevent herself from falling. Dark circles, like bruises, appeared beneath her usually luminous eyes. What was happening to the radiant Clara Thorne? Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, a seasoned obstetrician with a reputation for calm competence, grew increasingly concerned. Additional tests were run, blood panels, ultrasounds, nutritional assessments, but they yielded nothing conclusive. Everything appears normal on paper, Clara, Dr. Ainsworth said, her brow furrowed in thought after one particularly draining examination. But your symptoms are persistent. For now, strict bed rest is advisable, and we need to keep a very vigilant watch on your vitals, and of course, on the baby. Normal on paper? This was anything but normal. Julian, finally jolted from his self-absorbed world by the undeniable reality of Clara's suffering, became a man consumed by alarm. His passion for Seraphina, which had burned so fiercely, was temporarily doused by a cold wave of fear, and beneath it, a gnawing guilt. He abruptly canceled a series of international business trips, choosing to remain close to home, his presence a constant, worried shadow at Clara's bedside. He'd hold her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, his voice low and soothing as he read to her, or simply sat in shared silence. A guilty conscience or genuine concern? Perhaps both. This, however, was not the outcome Serafina had envisioned or desired. From the sidelines, from the frustrating distance of her now curtailed interactions with Julian, she watched her carefully constructed plan begin to unravel in an unexpected way. Instead of driving Julian away from his ailing wife and into her waiting arms, her meddling seemed to be having the opposite effect. Clara's deteriorating health had awakened Julian's dormant protective instincts, forging a bond of shared anxiety that Serafina found utterly infuriating. Damn it. He was supposed to be repulsed by the sickness, not drawn closer by it. Had she miscalculated so badly? The thought was a bitter pill. She realized, with a surge of frustrated anger, that she needed to accelerate her timeline, to administer something more decisive if she hoped to achieve her ultimate goal: Clara's permanent, irrevocable departure from Julian Thorne's life. The game was changing, and Serafina was not one to lose. But fate, it seemed, had a penchant for irony and further complications. Just as Serafina was recalibrating her strategy, Clara's father, Arthur Pendleton, arrived in Silverwood Hills. A retired diplomat with a keenly perceptive mind and an old-world gravitas, Arthur had never been entirely enamored with the ostentatious display of wealth that characterized the Thorne dynasty. However, for Clara's sake, he had maintained a cordial, if somewhat reserved, relationship with Julian. Now, alerted by Dr. Ainsworth's discreetly worded concerns, and Clara's own downplayed but nonetheless worrying letters, he decided to stay for an extended period in one of Shadowwood Manor's numerous guest suites. An unexpected player enters the game. How will this affect Serafina's plans? Arthur was not a man easily fooled. He spent hours with Clara, his presence a comforting balm, listening not just to her words, but to the unspoken anxieties that lay beneath. Clara, while admitting her physical struggles, expressed more worry about Julian drifting away emotionally, still attributing his distance to the pressures of his work and their impending parenthood, rather than suspecting the true, venomous cause. She didn't want to believe anything else. Privately, Arthur's astute eyes missed little. He saw the subtle signs of a fracturing marriage. Julian's forced joviality, a missed dinner here excused by a late meeting that somehow never materialized in his official schedule, a wandering, haunted glance there that hinted at deeper, more troubling issues. Arthur's quiet, observant presence within Shadowwood Manor made it infinitely more difficult for Serafina to orchestrate further clandestine visits or to rely on the increasingly nervous Annalise. The older man had an unnerving knack for noticing the slightest changes in the staff's demeanor, a shift in routine, an unexplained presence. Annalise, acutely aware of Mr. Pendleton's unwavering scrutiny, became far more cautious, her interactions with Serafina growing strained and infrequent. This new, unwelcome variable forced Serafina to refine her strategy yet again, to make each subsequent move even more calculated, more discreet, more fraught with risk. The pressure was mounting. And then, amidst all this turmoil, this delicate dance of deception and dawning suspicion, came the news of Clara's upcoming birthday. Julian, perhaps in a genuine attempt to lift Clara's spirits, or perhaps to assuage his own festering guilt, announced his intention to host a grand celebration. Shadowwood Manor, he declared, would once again be filled with flowers, music, and the glittering echelons of Silverwood Hills society. Clara, though still profoundly weak and plagued by intermittent nausea, found a flicker of her old enthusiasm. She looked forward to it, she told her father, as a chance to reconnect with Julian, to feel like herself again, even if just for one evening. She clung to the fragile hope that a shared, joyful moment could somehow bridge the widening chasm between them, especially with their baby due in just a few short months. The birthday party. A celebration of life, or something far more sinister. Serafina, learning of the impending party from a reluctant, terrified Annalise, whom she had cornered during a rare moment alone, saw it not just as a threat, but as a golden, unmissable opportunity. If Clara appeared radiant and happy at this ostentatious celebration, the society pages would inevitably spin it as a triumphant display of the Thornes' enduring love, further cementing Julian's commitment to his wife, to his family. Serafina would not allow that. Her mind, cold and clear, seized upon the thought. Clara's birthday. It was perfect. The perfect stage for a tragedy. The perfect moment to unleash a stronger, more definitive dose of Silas's potent tincture, ensuring Clara's dramatic collapse would not only overshadow any celebratory mood, but perhaps, just perhaps, endanger the pregnancy enough to create lasting, irreparable complications. Or better yet, the ultimate solution. The air in her apartment seemed to crackle with a malevolent energy as she contemplated the possibilities. This party, she thought with a chilling sense of anticipation, wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be an event that would echo through the annals of Silverwood Hills society for years to come. Yes, the stage was now perfectly set for a birthday celebration that would descend into infamy. A horrifying turning point where loyalty, jealousy, and insatiable greed would collide with devastating force under the glittering, uncaring chandeliers of Shadowwood Manor. And Serafina Dubois would be there, watching it all unfold, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. What horrors would this birthday hold? The answer, dear reader, is just a page-turn away. Birthday catastrophe, the mask of joy, the kiss of death. The air within Shadowwood Manor fairly crackled, thick with anticipation. It was the evening of Clara Thorne's 28th birthday, and the ancestral home gleamed like a polished, multifaceted jewel, each facet reflecting the opulent celebration Julian had orchestrated. Enormous, fragrant arrangements of ivory roses, stargazer lilies, and cascading orchids lined the baronial foyer, their perfume mingling with the subtle scent of beeswax from 1,000 flickering candles. In the formal drawing room, a renowned string quartet, specially flown in from Vienna, rehearsed a haunting melody by Debussy, the notes drifting through the gilded archways. The chandeliers, ancient Habsburg crystals passed down through Julian's lineage, sparkled with an almost sentient brilliance. But could all this light hide the darkness brewing? A far more sinister, more predatory gleam was in Serafina Dubois's amethyst eyes as she prepared to bestow her final, deadly gift upon the unsuspecting birthday girl. This wasn't just a party, it was a battlefield. Clara, though visibly weakened by the preceding weeks of unexplained illness, was determined to embrace the evening. A soft, ethereal glow emanated from her, a testament to her gentle spirit and the burgeoning life within. She wore a flowing gown of emerald green silk that showcased the gentle curve of her baby bump, a splash of vibrant life against the pallor that still clung to her cheeks. Hope, fragile yet tenacious, fluttered in her heart, a hope that this night, this grand gesture from Julian, might somehow mend the growing fractures in their marriage. But can hope survive a meticulously planned act of pure evil? Julian himself was the very picture of the adoring, attentive husband, his every action polished to a high sheen. He had personally overseen every minute detail, from the meticulously crafted menu featuring Clara's favorite delicacies to the hiring of the Viennese ensemble he knew she adored. He'd even arranged for a spectacular fireworks display to cap off the evening over the sprawling, moonlit gardens of Shadowwood. He moved through the assembling guests, the cream of Silverwood Hills society, captains of industry, even a visiting dignitary, Senator Alastair Finch, with an easy charm, a smile fixed on his lips. But beneath the bespoke tailoring of his tuxedo, guilt, a cold and heavy serpent, coiled in his stomach. Today, he told himself, his mantra a desperate prayer, today was all about Clara. He hoped, oh how he hoped, that this grand display of affection might somehow alleviate the crushing weight of his deceptions, the haunting knowledge of his affair with Serafina. But can expensive gestures truly wash away such deep stains of betrayal? Unbeknownst to either Julian or Clara, Serafina had already laid her trap with chilling, meticulous care. She arrived fashionably late, on the arm of Damien Vance, her crimson gown from the charity ball replaced by one of deepest sapphire, a color that seemed to absorb the light around her, making her appear even more enigmatic, more dangerous. Under the well-rehearsed pretense of assisting Damien with locating a misplaced gift and taking advantage of Annalise Finch's harried state as she juggled last-minute details for Clara, Serafina found her window of opportunity. The kitchen and service areas were a controlled chaos of liveried staff, bustling with trays of exquisite hors d'oeuvres and flutes of vintage champagne. Every celebration has its hidden corners, doesn't it? And Serafina was an expert at finding them. Seizing a moment when the head butler was distracted by an urgent query from the chef, Seraphina slipped, a phantom in sapphire, into the quiet, cool sanctity of the still room. Her eyes, now accustomed to the mansion's layout, immediately located the ornate, silver-chased tea caddy containing Clara's cherished birthday infusion. A fragrant, delicate mixture of white peony tea and silver linden flowers, a blend Julian had once sourced for her from a remote tea estate in the Orient during happier, less complicated times. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Her breath came in shallow, almost painful gasps. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the small, innocuous vial from its hiding place within her evening clutch. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of simmering hatred and desperate ambition. She emptied a significant portion of the clear, odorless liquid, Silas's most potent concoction, directly into the fragrant tea leaves, the tiny splash almost invisible. The instructions from her shadowy purveyor had been terrifyingly explicit. A dose of this magnitude could induce severe, catastrophic illness, potentially trigger a miscarriage, or worse. A maelstrom of conflicting emotions churned within her. A primal fear of discovery, a bitter resentment towards the woman who possessed everything she coveted, and a strange, almost unholy exhilaration at the precipice of such a monumental act. She quickly resealed the caddy, placed it precisely back on its shelf, and made a discreet, unhurried exit. Her composure a chilling mask over the inferno raging within. A poisoned gift, wrapped in love and tradition. How utterly diabolical. The festivities commenced, the grand ballroom alive with the lively chatter and laughter of Silverwood Hills elite. Crystal glasses clinked, vintage champagne flowed like water, and the Viennese quartet filled the air with soaring, romantic melodies. Arthur Pendleton, Clara's father, maintained a watchful, solicitous eye on his daughter, his earlier concerns now a constant, low thrum of anxiety beneath his composed exterior. Clara, for her part, was valiantly trying to immerse herself in the joy of the occasion, her smile, though tinged with fatigue, genuine and warm as she greeted friends and well-wishers. At one point, as she stood chatting with the wife of Senator Finch, a dizzying wave of faintness washed over her, the glittering ballroom suddenly tilting at an alarming angle. Her hand flew to her temple. "Oh my," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur was at her side in an instant, his expression a mixture of concern and alarm. "Clara, my dear, are you all right? You look terribly pale." "Just a little, light-headed, Papa," she managed, attempting a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Worried about his daughter, and increasingly suspicious of the unnatural pallor that had clung to her for weeks, Arthur gently but firmly suggested she rest for a while in one of the upstairs suites. "Just for a few moments, my love. To gather your strength. No one will mind." Clara, not wanting to cause a scene or spoil the elaborate celebration Julian had arranged, reluctantly agreed. Julian, at that precise moment, was deeply engrossed in a conversation with Senator Finch, a man whose political influence could significantly benefit Thorne Industries. He excused himself with a hurried apology as soon as Annalise Finch, her face etched with worry, relayed the news that Clara had gone upstairs feeling unwell. Racing to her side, Julian found Clara resting on a plush chaise lounge in the quiet seclusion of their private sitting room, a half-empty glass of water trembling in her hand. "Clara, what is it? Are you in pain?" he asked, his voice tight with a panicky urgency that surprised even himself. Clara offered a weak smile. "Just a temporary spell of weakness, Julian. The baby and I are just a little overwhelmed by all the excitement, I think." But Julian, his guilt now morphing into a raw, primal fear, wouldn't be placated. He insisted that Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth, who was among the invited guests and a close family friend, take a look at her immediately. Dr. Ainsworth, ever the consummate professional, examined Clara briefly, checking her pulse, her blood pressure, her responsiveness. "Her vitals are stable for the moment, Julian," she concluded, her tone calm but with an underlying note of professional concern. "But she does seem exceptionally fatigued. Plenty of hydration, avoid overstimulation, and perhaps a quiet early night would be best." A doctor's reassurance, but was it enough to dispel the growing unease? Feeling somewhat reassured, yet still longing to cling to the fleeting joy of her birthday celebration, Clara agreed to return downstairs for the traditional cutting of the cake. The magnificent confection, 3 towering tiers of decadent Valrhona chocolate and raspberry mousse, draped in spun sugar and adorned with crystallized violets, sat on a table swathed in gold damask, a testament to Julian's extravagant gesture. As Clara, leaning lightly on Julian's arm, descended the grand staircase, the assembled guests burst into a spontaneous, warm round of applause. She smiled, genuinely touched by the outpouring of affection from their friends and family. Julian joined her at the cake table, placing a gentle proprietary hand on the small of her back, a picture of domestic bliss. Or was it? Serafina, a silent, watchful predator lurking at the fringes of the glittering crowd, observed every minute detail with an unnerving intensity. Her gaze, sharp and calculating, noted the precise moment when one of the household staff, a young maid named Elsie, leaned in to whisper in Clara's ear, presumably about preparing her special birthday tea to accompany the cake. Elsie then disappeared discreetly towards the kitchen to brew a pot of Clara's favorite white peony and silver linden flower blend from the ornate caddy in the still room. The very caddy Serafina had so recently, so lethally, corrupted. The wheels of her plot were turning, unstoppable, after the chorus of happy birthday had faded and the candles on the magnificent cake were extinguished with a soft wish from Clara. Elsie reappeared, bearing a delicate silver tray. Upon it rested a single, exquisite antique porcelain teacup, its contents steaming gently, releasing a subtle, floral aroma. Clara, feeling a renewed wave of nausea and hoping the familiar infusion would soothe her uneasy stomach, accepted the cup gratefully. She smiled at Julian, a tired but tender smile. Then she raised the cup to her lips, utterly, tragically unaware that it carried a lethal dose of Serafina Dubois's meticulously administered poison. A single sip. That's all it would take. It didn't take long. The effect was terrifyingly swift. Within minutes of taking the first few sips, the little color Clara possessed drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly ashen gray. Her eyes widened in sudden, uncomprehending terror. A low moan escaped her lips as a searing, wrenching pain seized her abdomen, doubling her over. A cold, clammy sweat beaded across her forehead. Alarmed Julian, who had turned to thank Senator Finch for his good wishes, noticed her trembling, her sudden, violent change in demeanor. "Clara? What's wrong?" He caught her just as she collapsed, her body going limp in his arms. The delicate porcelain teacup shattering on the cold, unforgiving marble floor, the poisoned tea spreading like a malevolent stain, a stain that could never be truly washed away. Gasps and shrieks of horror erupted among the stunned guests. A wave of panic rippled through the opulent ballroom. Dr. Ainsworth, her professional instincts overriding social decorum, elbowed her way through the gathering, horrified crowd, her voice sharp and commanding. "Give her space. Someone call for an ambulance. Now." She knelt beside Clara, her fingers immediately going to Clara's wrist, then to her neck, checking for a pulse, assessing her breathing. The situation was critical. Clara's heart rate was terrifyingly erratic, her breathing shallow and labored. This was no mere fainting spell. Arthur Pendleton, his face a mask of grim disbelief, rushed to his daughter's side, his composure finally cracking as he knelt beside Julian, his hand reaching out to stroke Clara's damp hair. Panic, raw and uncontained, spread like wildfire through Shadowwood Manor. In the ensuing chaos, Serafina Dubois, the architect of this unfolding tragedy, managed to feign a convincing display of shock and concern. She artfully wiped away imaginary tears, her hand fluttering to her chest in a gesture of distress as she allowed a frantic, oblivious Damien Vance to comfort her, while they awaited the arrival of the paramedics. Inwardly, however, a maelstrom of emotions raged, a chilling terror at the possibility of exposure, a perverse satisfaction at the undeniable swiftness and efficacy of her actions, and a fleeting, quickly suppressed flicker of doubt. Had she, perhaps, gone too far? But there was no turning back now. Julian, on his knees on the cold marble, cradled Clara's lolling head in his lap, his carefully constructed facade of the suave millionaire utterly demolished. Tears, hot and unashamed, streamed down his face, carving paths through his usually impassive features. Regret, a monstrous, consuming entity, tore at him. He realized only now, in this moment of horrifying clarity, how deeply, how irrevocably, he loved his wife. How casually, how unforgivably, he had taken her gentle presence, her unwavering love, for granted. As the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, and the paramedics, grim-faced and efficient, arrived and carefully lifted Clara's inert form onto a stretcher, Julian felt a helplessness so profound it threatened to suffocate him. Was this some horrific, unforeseen complication of the pregnancy? Or was it something far more sinister? Over and over, like a desperate litany, Julian whispered, his voice choked with sobs. "Hold on, Clara. Please, God, hold on. Don't leave me." His words were a prayer lost in the unfolding nightmare. The glittering assembly of guests parted like the Red Sea to allow the paramedics' swift passage, their faces a mixture of horror, disbelief, and a morbid, fascinated curiosity. No one could fully grasp the enormity of what had just transpired. But the raw, unadulterated anguish etched on Julian Thorne's face spoke volumes. He feared, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was on the precipice of losing not only his wife, but also their unborn child. And so, on the very night Clara Thorne was meant to celebrate another year of life, she lay unconscious in the back of an ambulance, her fate hanging by the slenderest of threads, racing through the darkened streets of Silverwood Hills towards the uncertain sanctuary of the Silverwood Crest Medical Center. Shadowwood Manor, mere moments before aglow with laughter, music, and the warm light of celebration, was plunged into a stunned, hushed darkness, overshadowed by a tragedy that was no accident, but a meticulously, malevolently crafted catastrophe. The sterile, brightly lit waiting area of Silverwood Crest Medical Center throbbed with a palpable tension. Julian and Arthur paced the length of the corridor like caged animals, their eyes darting anxiously towards the closed double doors leading to the emergency trauma unit, where Clara was being attended to by a frantic team of specialists. Dr. Ainsworth was inside with Clara, her familiar presence a small comfort, overseeing a barrage of tests. Serafina, ever the actress, lingered in a shadowed corner, her performance of a concerned friend flawless. Damien Vance, still bewildered, hovered protectively. The tension spiked when a team of obstetric and toxicology specialists rushed into the emergency unit. Minutes stretched. Finally, Dr. Ainsworth emerged, her face etched with exhaustion. "She's stable, for now," she announced, her voice low. "But it's critical. Her symptoms, they strongly suggest some form of acute toxic exposure." She paused. "We're running comprehensive toxicology screenings, and we need to monitor the baby with extreme vigilance." Toxic exposure. Julian felt the floor dissolve. Clara's special birthday tea. Hadn't she said it tasted odd? His heart hammered. Could Serafina? No, too monstrous. Or was it? As grim-faced police officers began arriving at Shadowwood Manor, Detective Miles Corbin listened to initial reports. His gaze, quiet and observant, caught a flagged note on the guest list. Serafina Dubois. Person of interest, a prior complex fraud investigation. No charges filed, circumstantial. But the breadcrumb was there. "Interesting," Corbin murmured. "Very interesting indeed." The first threads of a dark, tangled web were beginning to emerge. What would they uncover next? The investigator's gaze, unraveling a web of lies. The sterile hum of Silverwood Crest Medical Center became the soundtrack to days blurred by fear and the acrid scent of antiseptic. Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose quiet intensity often unnerved those accustomed to more bombastic displays of authority, had a particular talent for sifting through the debris of shattered lives to find the sharp edges of truth. And the truth he was seeking, he suspected, lay hidden beneath layers of expensive perfume and sophisticated lies, leading him ever closer to Serafina Dubois' doorstep. That old fraud investigation, it whispered of a pattern, didn't it? A woman who knew how to get what she wanted, consequences be damned. Clara Thorne, meanwhile, drifted in a precarious twilight between life and death. For several agonizing days, she remained in a medically induced semi-consciousness, her body a fragile battleground as doctors fought to counteract the insidious poison that coursed through her veins. Julian and Arthur Pendleton rarely left her side, their vigil a tense tableau of shared grief and unspoken anxieties. Julian, stripped of his usual arrogance, looked like a ghost of his former self, the weight of his guilt a palpable presence in the sterile room. Arthur, ever the stoic diplomat, maintained a composed exterior, but the tremor in his hand as he reached for his daughter's inert fingers betrayed the depth of his anguish. Finally, the comprehensive toxicology reports landed like a bombshell. Clara had indeed been poisoned, deliberately. The substance was a rare, complex botanical compound, highly concentrated, designed for slow, almost undetectable devastation, yet administered in a quantity that suggested a terrifying final intent. It was the kind of poison that screamed premeditation, cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. Who could possess such cruelty? Shadowwood Manor, no longer a symbol of idyllic prosperity, transformed overnight into a sprawling, opulent crime scene. The gleam of its polished marble floors now reflected the grim, methodical movements of forensic teams. Yellow police tape, stark and incongruous against the ancient, ivy-clad stone, cordoned off entire sections of the estate. Detectives, led by the quietly relentless Miles Corbin, moved through the silent rooms, their questions sharp, their observations meticulous. Every member of the household staff, from the head butler to the youngest parlor-maid, was subjected to rounds of intense, unnerving questioning. Their faces, a mixture of shock, fear, and a dawning, horrified comprehension, told their own stories of an idyll shattered. It was Annalise Finch, Clara's timid, artistic personal assistant, who finally provided the crucial break in the case. The young woman was a wreck, her days a torment of sleepless nights and a gnawing, corrosive guilt that twisted her insides. She knew, with a certainty that felt like a physical illness, that her naivety, her star-struck fascination with the glamorous Serafina Dubois, had made her an unwitting pawn in a deadly game. The weight of her complicity, however unintentional, became unbearable. One dreary afternoon, her face tear-streaked and ashen, she sought out Arthur Pendleton in the somber, shadowed expanse of the Shadowwood Library. The words, when they finally came, tumbled out in a torrent of choked sobs and fragmented, almost incoherent sentences. She recounted with painful honesty Serafina's calculated cultivation of their friendship, the way the older woman had expertly preyed on her loneliness, her artistic aspirations, her quiet fascination with the world of wealth and privilege. She confessed to facilitating Serafina's clandestine visits to the manor, all under the tragically misguided belief that Serafina was merely a close, if somewhat eccentric friend of Julian's, perhaps planning some elaborate, harmless surprise. And then the most damning detail of all, the memory that had haunted her waking moments and invaded her nightmares. Annalise admitted, her voice barely a whisper, to once seeing Serafina near the still room, her back to the door, her movements furtive, fiddling with a small, dark glass vial just moments before Clara's special birthday tea was due to be prepared. At the time, Annalise hadn't thought much of it. Perhaps a rare perfume or some exotic essential oil Serafina favored. Now, the memory was a shard of ice piercing her heart, the implication too horrifying to fully comprehend. Could she have stopped it? The question would haunt her forever. Arthur Pendleton listened, his patrician features hardening into a mask of cold, controlled fury as Annalise's pathetic, tragic story unfolded. He didn't berate the distraught young woman. He saw the genuine, unadulterated remorse, the naive terror that still clung to her like a shroud. "Annalise," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through her heartbroken sobs with a steely authority. "You must tell this to Detective Corbin. Every single detail. It is imperative. For Clara's sake." Annalise Finch's subsequent formal statement at the Silverwood Hills Police Precinct was the linchpin Detective Corbin had been patiently, methodically waiting for. Her tearful, detailed account of Serafina's insidious manipulation, her specific, almost obsessive interest in Clara's routines, and in particular, her tea-drinking habits, and crucially, the chilling sighting of the mysterious vial near the still room on the day of the party, provided the investigation with both a credible motive and a clear opportunity. Coupled with the troubling whispers of Serafina's questionable financial past and her undeniable, strategically positioned presence at the ill-fated birthday celebration, Corbin now had more than enough concrete evidence to proceed. He immediately sought, and was granted, a search warrant for Serafina Dubois's opulent penthouse apartment, a gilded cage high above the glittering, indifferent city. When Detective Corbin and a team of uniformed officers arrived at Serafina's door later that evening, she greeted them with an air of cool, almost disdainful amusement. She was dressed in a flowing silk lounge robe, the color of champagne, her dark hair artfully disheveled, a half-empty glass of what looked suspiciously like Julian Thorne's favorite single-malt scotch in her hand. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow at the sight of the warrant Corbin presented. "A search warrant, Detective Corbin? How delightfully dramatic. Do come in. And please, try not to scuff the Italian marble, will you? It's frightfully expensive." Her audacity was breathtaking, but beneath the confident, almost flippant facade, Corbin, a keen observer of human nature, detected the faintest tremor in her voice, a telltale, almost imperceptible flicker of panic in her otherwise unreadable amethyst eyes. She watched, a faint, disdainful smile playing on her lips as if she were observing some rather tedious provincial theatrical, as the officers began their methodical, meticulous search of her exquisitely appointed, surprisingly sterile apartment. They were professional, thorough, leaving no velvet cushion unturned, no lacquered drawer unopened. Her vast walk-in closets, a veritable museum of haute couture and designer shoes, were systematically examined. Her vanity table, with its glittering, almost ostentatious array of expensive French perfumes and an arsenal of cosmetics, was carefully, painstakingly scrutinized. The sleek, minimalist kitchen, which looked as if it had never seen a moment's actual culinary use, was given a cursory, if thorough, glance. Nothing. For a moment, a flicker of triumph quickly masked crossed Serafina's features. Had she outsmarted them after all? Her smile widened almost imperceptibly. "Quite the elaborate treasure hunt, Detective. Finding anything incriminating amongst my lingerie and lipstick?" she purred, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her scotch. Corbin ignored her taunt, his attention focused on a small, antique rosewood writing desk tucked away in a discreet alcove of the vast, art-filled living room. One of the drawers, he noted, was locked. "Miss Dubois," he said, his voice polite but firm, betraying none of the tension that was beginning to build in the room. "Would you be so kind as to provide the key for this particular drawer?" A shadow, fleeting but definite, crossed Serafina's face. "The key?" She feigned a moment of thought. "Oh, that silly old thing. I seem to have misplaced it. Such a terrible nuisance, these antique locks, don't you find?" "Indeed," Corbin replied, his gaze unwavering. "In that case, Miss Dubois, with your permission or without it, we'll have to open it. Officer Miller, if you please." He motioned to one of his younger officers, who, with a grim professionalism, produced a slender set of specialized lock-picking tools. The sharp, distinct click of the old tumblers finally yielding to Miller's skilled ministrations was a small, sharp, almost unbearably loud sound in the otherwise oppressive silence of the room. It sounded, Serafina thought with a sudden, sickening lurch of her stomach, like the snapping shut of a trap. Inside the drawer, nestled amongst a sheaf of expensive, cream-colored monogrammed stationery and a collection of antique silver letter openers, lay a small, innocuous, velvet-lined jewelry box. And within that box, half hidden beneath a tangle of glittering, rarely worn diamond and sapphire baubles, was a small, dark glass vial, identical in every respect to the one Annalise Finch had so vividly, so damningly described. It was half-used. The game, it seemed, was up. The forensic lab at the Silverwood Hills precinct confirmed it within hours. The colorless, odorless liquid remaining in the vial was a perfect, irrefutable match for the rare, complex botanical compound that had been found in Clara Thorne's ravaged bloodstream, and, crucially, in the dregs of the shattered porcelain teacup recovered from the marble floor of Shadowwood Manor. The net had closed. Serafina Dubois was arrested later that evening, the charges stark and brutal: attempted murder of Clara Thorne and attempted murder of an unborn child. As the uniformed officers, their faces impassive, read her rights, her carefully constructed posture finally, spectacularly shattered. Her face, contorted with a mixture of wild, disbelieving rage and a dawning animalistic terror, was a shocking contrast to the cool, collected, sophisticated woman who had greeted them at her door only hours before. "This is an absolute outrage," she shrieked, her voice raw and shaking, a harsh, ugly sound as the cold, unyielding steel of the handcuffs closed around her slender, delicate wrists. "You have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with. I'm being framed. Framed, do you hear me? This is a travesty." Her protests, however, were futile. The news of Serafina's arrest exploded across the city like a wildfire, igniting a media firestorm of unprecedented proportions. Headlines, bold and damning, screamed of the Silverwood Hills poisoning plot, the Millionaire's femme fatale Mistress, the birthday party betrayal. Reporters and paparazzi, like a pack of hungry wolves, swarmed Shadowwood Manor, Silverwood Crest Medical Center, and the police precinct, desperate for any salacious detail, any lurid scrap of information. Julian Thorne, through his phalanx of grim-faced, high-powered attorneys, issued a terse, unequivocal no comment, stating only that his sole, unwavering focus was on his wife's fragile recovery and the continued well-being of their unborn child. The Thorne name, once a revered bastion of untouchable wealth, impeccable breeding, and quiet societal prestige, was now irrevocably, devastatingly, tainted by a scandal so dark, so shocking, it threatened to consume them all, its gilded facade crumbling to reveal the ugly, festering secrets that lay hidden within. Meanwhile, in the hushed, sterile quiet of her private hospital room, Clara Thorne was slowly, painstakingly beginning her long, arduous journey back from the brink of death. The days were an agonizing blur of medical procedures, hushed, worried consultations between a battery of specialists, and the constant, oppressive weight of a profound, bone-deep weakness. But gradually, miraculously, her innate strength, her will to live, for herself, for her unborn child, began to assert itself. Fleeting moments of lucidity slowly, tentatively, stretched into longer, more coherent stretches of awareness. One cool, rain-swept afternoon, as Julian sat by her bedside, his handsome face etched with sleeplessness and a despair so profound it seemed to physically consume him, Clara's eyelids fluttered open. She looked at him, truly, deeply looked at him, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He reached for her hand, his touch hesitant, almost fearful, as if he expected her to recoil. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Her voice, when it finally came, was a mere breath, fragile as spun moonlight, yet imbued with a quiet, heartbreaking clarity. "Julian, what happened to me?" And so in the stark, unforgiving glare of the sterile hospital room, with the rhythmic, monotonous beep of the heart monitor a somber, relentless counterpoint to his agonized words, Julian Thorne, his soul stripped bare, confessed. Everything. The sordid, tawdry affair with Serafina Dubois, the insidious web of lies, the casual deceit, the catastrophic betrayal that had almost cost Clara her life, and the precious, innocent life of their child. He spared her nothing, spared himself nothing, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of raw, unfiltered self-loathing and a profound, soul-crushing remorse that offered no absolution, no comfort. Clara listened, her wide, luminous eyes, the color of a summer sky, slowly filling with tears. Tears not just of lingering physical pain, but of a betrayal so profound, so devastatingly intimate, it threatened to shatter what little remained of her fractured world. When he finally fell silent, his proud head bowed, his broad shoulders shaking with the force of his unshed, agonizing sobs, she whispered, her voice trembling, laced with a dawning, almost unbearable horror. "Serafina? The woman Damien Vance brought to my birthday party? Someone you were with, tried to kill me? And our baby?" The disbelief, the sheer, unadulterated shock of it, was a fresh wave of agony, more potent than any physical pain she had endured. Julian could only nod, his throat raw, his own tears finally breaking free, hot and shaming, carving paths down his ravaged face. "Clara, I am so sorry," he choked out, his voice thick with a despair that offered no solace, no redemption. This is all my fault, my unforgivable, my wretched, damnable fault." As Clara Thorne lay in her hospital bed, slowly, agonizingly, absorbing the full, horrifying truth of her husband's devastating betrayal and her rival's murderous, obsessive intent, Serafina Dubois, from the cold, sterile confines of a police holding cell, was already meticulously, chillingly, plotting her defense. Incensed, defiant, utterly unrepentant, she used her one allotted phone call not to contact family or friends. Were there any true ones left? But to secure the services of the most notoriously ruthless, morally flexible, high-powered defense attorney in the city. Her narrative was already taking shape in her cunning, manipulative mind. She was the true victim here, a pawn in a dangerous game, tragically framed by a jealous, unstable former assistant, perhaps even by Julian Thorne himself, a convenient, disposable scapegoat to cover his own dark sins and protect his precious family name. The intricate web of lies was far from unraveled. It was merely being respun, its threads stronger, more venomous, ready for its dramatic, sensational debut in a packed, expectant courtroom. The real battle, the battle for public perception, for Julian's soul, for Serafina's freedom, it seemed, had only just begun. and the city held its breath. Courtroom reckoning, the price of obsession. The air outside the venerable stone edifice of the Central Criminal Court was a maelstrom, a churning vortex of flashbulbs, shouting reporters and morbidly curious onlookers, all held precariously at bay by a line of stern-faced police officers. This was it. The trial of Serafina Dubois, a spectacle that had gripped the city, promising a salacious glimpse into the gilded cage of Silverwood Hills society and the venomous secrets it concealed. The day had dawned gray and oppressive, the sky weeping a persistent drizzle that did little to dampen the fervent energy of the assembled media circus. Each arrival was met with a fresh frenzy, the prosecuting counsel stern and unyielding, Serafina's high-powered silver-tongued defense attorney radiating an almost theatrical confidence, and then the thorns. Would justice prevail, or would wealth and influence once again twist the narrative? This was more than a trial. It was a public dissection of a private hell. Clara Thorne, still achingly frail but with a newfound steely resolve in her pale blue eyes, arrived in a discreet black town car. She was in a wheelchair, a necessity dictated by her slow, arduous recovery, gently pushed by Julian. Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth walked beside them, a supportive professional presence. Julian, his face a mask of grim determination, shielded Clara from the worst of the intrusive camera lenses, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead. The shouted questions, a barrage of crude, invasive inquiries about his affair, about Clara's health, about the baby, he ignored completely. His public reckoning was about to begin, and he seemed to carry the weight of it in every line of his body. What must it feel like to have your deepest shames laid bare for the world to see? Inside the hallowed, oak-paneled courtroom, an almost suffocating silence reigned, broken only by the rustle of papers and the occasional cough. Judge Alistair Blackwood, a man whose reputation for stern impartiality and no-nonsense jurisprudence preceded him, presided from his elevated bench, his gaze sweeping over the packed room with an expression that brooked no theatrics. He wasted no time in calling the court to order, his gavel falling with a sharp, definitive crack. The stage was set for a drama that would rival any fiction. Serafina Dubois sat at the defense table, flanked by her formidable legal counsel, led by the renowned Atticus Thorne, no relation to Julian, a fact the tabloids had nonetheless feasted upon with predictable glee. Gone was the vibrant, predatory glamour she had once flaunted. Today, Serafina was the picture of demure, almost pitiable modesty. She wore a simple, high-necked dress of a muted dove gray, her dark hair pulled back severely from her face, her expression one of carefully cultivated vulnerability. Only the faintest, almost imperceptible tightening around her lips betrayed the inferno of rage and defiance that simmered beneath the placid surface. The charges against her were severe, each one read out in the sonorous tones of the court clerk. Attempted murder of Clara Thorne, attempted murder of an unborn child, reckless endangerment. Could this seemingly meek woman be capable of such monstrous acts? The prosecution, led by the coolly efficient district attorney, Evelyn Hayes, opened with a compelling, damning narrative. Hayes painted a vivid picture of Serafina's consuming jealousy, her sense of entitlement, her ruthless ambition. She portrayed Serafina not as a woman scorned, but as a calculating, scheming mistress who saw Clara's pregnancy, Clara's very existence, as an intolerable roadblock to her own insatiable desires for wealth, status, and Julian Thorne himself. The motive was clear, brutal, and as old as time itself: envy. The first key witness for the prosecution was Annalise Finch, Clara's former assistant, her face still bearing the haunted look of someone who has been irrevocably scarred by events beyond her control, took the stand. Tears streamed down her cheeks as D.A. Hayes gently guided her through her testimony, her voice trembling as she recounted Serafina's insidious manipulation. The way she had preyed on Annalise's loneliness and artistic aspirations to gain access to Shadowwood Manor, to glean intimate details about Clara's life. She described the clandestine visits, Serafina's unnerving interest in Clara's routines, and, most damningly, the sighting of Serafina near the still room with that small, dark vial. Serafina's attorney, Atticus Thorne, was relentless in his cross-examination, attempting to paint Annalise as a disgruntled, star-struck employee with a personal grudge, or perhaps even as an accomplice now seeking to save her own skin. But Annalise, though visibly distressed, held firm, her voice gaining a surprising strength as she reiterated, "I had no vendetta. Only guilt for my unintentional involvement." I believed her. I truly believed she was a friend. Her testimony was a heartbreaking portrait of innocence betrayed. Next came the forensic experts. Their testimony a dry, methodical, yet utterly devastating account of the scientific evidence. They detailed with clinical precision how the rare botanical compound found in Serafina Dubois's penthouse apartment was an exact match to the toxins identified in Clara Thorne's system, and in the residue found in the shattered teacup. They walked the jury through complex chemical breakdowns, distribution timelines, and the horrifying effects of such a poison on the human body, especially that of a pregnant woman, establishing beyond any reasonable doubt that the substance was not something typically found in household products, nor something one could accidentally ingest in such concentrations. Science, cold and hard, was pointing a finger directly at Serafina. Then, a tense hush fell over the courtroom as Julian Thorne was called to the witness stand. This was the moment the press, the public, the entire city had been waiting for. The millionaire husband, the adulterer, the man whose infidelity had, directly or indirectly, led to this near-fatal tragedy. Julian took his seat, his face pale but his gaze steady as he swore to tell the truth. His voice when he began his testimony was heavy with a palpable, soul-deep remorse. He recounted, with unflinching honesty, how he had first met Serafina, how their casual flirtation had spiraled into a dangerous, all-consuming affair, the profound guilt he felt and continues to feel for betraying Clara, the woman he now realized he loved more than life itself. His confession was raw, painful, a man stripped bare of his defenses. When Atticus Thorne rose to cross-examine him, the courtroom crackled with anticipation. Thorne's strategy was clear: to insinuate that Julian, tired of his pregnant wife, or perhaps fearing the financial implications of a messy divorce, had orchestrated an elaborate frame-up to rid himself of an inconvenient mistress, using Serafina as his unwitting pawn. "Mr. Thorne," Atticus began, his voice smooth as silk, "isn't it true that your relationship with Miss Dubois had become burdensome? That you were looking for a way out, a way to extricate yourself without damaging your pristine public image?" Julian met his gaze directly, his voice firm despite the tremor of emotion that ran beneath it. "My relationship with Miss Dubois was a grave mistake, a betrayal of my wife and my vows. But I would never, ever, harm Clara or our child. There is no logical reason, no conceivable scenario in which I would do such a thing. My only desire then and now is for Clara's safety and well-being." Then came the question everyone had anticipated, the one designed to unnerve him, to perhaps elicit a flicker of lingering affection that could be twisted and used. Atticus Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Thorne, tell the court, do you still have feelings for my client, Miss Serafina Dubois?" The courtroom held its breath. What would he say? A collective intake of breath. Julian didn't hesitate. He turned, his gaze finding Clara in her wheelchair. Her eyes, though shadowed with pain, held a quiet strength that seemed to anchor him. He inhaled sharply, then turned back to face his questioner, his voice clear and unwavering. "I was infatuated, misguided, perhaps even temporarily lost. But that is over, completely and utterly over. My only concern now, my only feelings, are for my wife, Clara, and for our child, and for ensuring that justice is served here today." A public declaration, a line drawn in the sand. For the first time during the entire trial, Serafina Dubois lost her meticulously crafted composure. It was as if Julian's words, his public, unequivocal rejection, had finally pierced her armor of icy disdain. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the polished wood floor, her face contorted, trembling, tears of rage and thwarted desire pooling in her amethyst eyes. "You liar!" she shrieked, her voice, raw and ragged, echoing across the stunned silence of the courtroom. "You promised me everything. You said you loved me. You said Clara was nothing to you, just an obligation." Her mask had shattered. Judge Blackwood's gavel slammed down with force. "Order! Order in this court! Ms. Dubois, control yourself, or I will have you removed." The bailiff moved swiftly towards Serafina, who, as if her strings had been cut, collapsed back into her seat, dissolving into a torrent of convulsive, theatrical sobs. The jury watched, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension, seeing firsthand the depths of her emotional instability, the raw, obsessive nature of her alleged affections. The carefully constructed victim narrative was crumbling before their very eyes. During the defense's case, Atticus Thorne, despite his client's damaging outburst, fought valiantly, if desperately. He attempted to recast Serafina as the victim, a naive woman manipulated by a powerful, ruthless man, Julian Thorne. He even, in a moment that stunned the courtroom into momentary silence, floated a desperate, unfounded theory. The third curiosity element that had been whispered about in the investigation, suggesting that Clara Thorne, perhaps overwhelmed by the stresses of her high-risk pregnancy or an undiagnosed prenatal depression, might have had reasons for accidental self-dosing or even attempts at self-harm. The accusation was so outlandish, so cruel, that D.A. Hayes was on her feet in an instant, objecting vehemently. Judge Blackwood sustained the objection, his disapproval a palpable force, and instructed the jury to disregard the baseless insinuation. But the momentary shockwave had rippled through the courtroom, a testament to the defense's willingness to hurl any desperate narrative into the fray. The prosecution, in their rebuttal, quickly and clinically dismantled these claims, pointing to the overwhelming weight of physical evidence, the damning phone records detailing Serafina's contact with Annalise Finch's consistent, corroborated testimony, and Serafina's own incriminating actions. The web was tightening. It took the jury less than 2 days to reach a verdict. As the foreperson, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, stood to read it, the tension in the courtroom thickened to an almost unbearable, viscous quality. Every breath was held. On the charge of attempted murder of Clara Thorne, we, the jury, find the defendant, Serafina Dubois. A pause that stretched for an eternity. Guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, quickly morphing into a low murmur of chatter. Judge Blackwood's gavel fell again. Order. The foreperson continued, her voice clear and steady. On the charge of attempted murder of an unborn child, guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty. The words fell like hammer blows. Serafina Dubois's face, already pale, went ashen. She shook her head slowly, a gesture of utter disbelief, as though she genuinely could not fathom that her carefully woven illusions, her sense of entitlement, her belief in her own power to manipulate and control, had unraveled so completely, so irrevocably. The price of obsession was about to be paid. Judge Alistair Blackwood, his expression grim, proceeded to sentencing. He cited the calculated, premeditated nature of the crime, the extreme vulnerability of the pregnant victim, and the profound, lasting harm inflicted. He sentenced Serafina Dubois to a lengthy prison term, the exact number of years a stark, brutal pronouncement that sealed her fate. 15 years. An eternity. In that moment, as the sentence was read, all eyes in the courtroom, as if drawn by an invisible current, turned to Julian Thorne. How would he react? The tabloids had speculated wildly. Would he break down in relief, show unbridled fury towards the woman who had betrayed him? Or perhaps, even now, exhibit some flicker of misguided sympathy, some lingering shadow of their illicit bond? Instead, Julian exhibited a reaction that, in its quiet, profound devastation, shocked the entire courtroom more than any outburst could have. He rose slowly from his seat beside Clara. He walked, with a heavy, measured tread, across the well of the court to where Serafina sat, now slumped and defeated, her defense attorney patting her shoulder awkwardly. He stopped before her. He looked her directly in the eyes, a fleeting, unreadable moment of connection, perhaps a farewell, perhaps a final damning judgment. Then, without a word, he turned away. Tears, undeniable and glistening, traced paths down his cheeks as he walked back to Clara's side, gently, tenderly, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. His silent devastation spoke volumes. Reporters would later describe it as a moment of silent, utter devastation, a profound, public acknowledgement of the irreparable harm caused not just by Serafina's actions, but by his own catastrophic lapses in moral judgment, his own devastating betrayals. The tabloids, ever eager for a dramatic headline, dubbed it the look that shook the courtroom, capturing Julian Thorne's final, silent glance at the woman who had so nearly destroyed his life, and in doing so, had irrevocably shattered his own. In that single, subtle, heart-wrenching moment, those who watched saw not just a billionaire tycoon, but a broken man grappling with the full, terrible weight of his regret, his sorrow, and a solemn, agonizing acceptance of his own complicity. Seraphina Dubois, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror, was led away in handcuffs by the court bailiffs, her high society dreams reduced to the grim reality of a prison cell. Clara Thorne watched her go, her own tears now trickling silently down her pale cheeks. Tears of relief, yes, but also tears of a deep, ineffable sadness for the innocence lost, the trust shattered, the lives irrevocably altered. In that instant, she saw Julian not as the arrogant, philandering magnate, nor even as the contrite, remorseful husband, but simply as a flawed, deeply wounded man, forever scarred by the devastating consequences of his own human failings. For better or for worse, their lives, and the life of their unborn child, had been inexorably, terrifyingly changed by this descent into madness. The legal battle had reached its dramatic conclusion, but what of the emotional war still raging within their hearts? The path to healing, if one even existed, stretched before them, long, arduous, and shrouded in uncertainty. Beyond the scars, a new dawn, a fragile hope. The heavy iron gates of Blackwood Correctional Facility clanged shut, the sound echoing with a grim finality that sealed Seraphina Dubois's gilded, venomous dreams within its cold stone walls. That clang was more than just a closing door. It was the sound of a chapter ending. A dark, terrifying chapter. But for Clara and Julian Thorne, standing on the precipice of an uncertain future, the echoes of betrayal, of a trust so violently shattered, would reverberate for years to come, shaping a life neither of them could ever have envisioned. Could they ever truly move beyond the scars? In the weeks and months that followed the trial, an almost palpable quiet descended upon Shadowwood Manor. The once bustling, opulent halls, so often alive with the cacophony of lavish parties and glittering galas, now felt strangely hollow, imbued with a somber stillness. Events were cancelled, social engagements politely declined. The liveried staff, their numbers discreetly reduced, moved about their duties with a hushed solemnity, their primary focus now the comfort and delicate health of Mrs. Thorne. The laughter had faded, replaced by a quiet so profound it felt like a presence itself. Clara was eventually discharged from Silverwood Crest Medical Center, her physical recovery a slow, arduous process under the constant, vigilant supervision of Dr. Eleanor Ainsworth. A suite of rooms on the ground floor of Shadowwood Manor, overlooking the once-cherished rose gardens, was converted into a home care facility, complete with medical equipment and a discreet nursing staff. Dr. Ainsworth visited twice, sometimes 3 times a week, meticulously checking Clara's vitals, administering necessary medications, and ensuring that the tiny, precious heartbeat of the unborn child within her remained steady and strong. Miraculously, thanks to the swift medical intervention and Clara's own quiet, steely resilience, their baby had survived the ordeal, though the pregnancy remained categorized as extremely high risk. Each steady beat of that tiny heart was a victory, a defiant note of hope in a symphony of despair. Julian, a changed man, or perhaps a man finally stripped bare of his own illusions, dedicated himself entirely to Clara's care. He spent countless hours by her side, sometimes holding her hand in a silence that was more eloquent than any words, sometimes reading aloud from her favorite poets. His voice, once so confident and commanding, now softened with a tenderness she hadn't heard in years. At first, Clara avoided the raw, gaping wound of his betrayal. She was too exhausted, too emotionally fragile, to confront the full toll it had exacted. But one quiet afternoon, as a gentle rain pattered against the tall French windows of her sitting room, painting the world outside in shades of gray, she finally asked the question that had haunted her waking moments and tormented her fitful sleep. Her voice was a mere whisper, devoid of accusation, yet heavy with an almost unbearable sadness. "Why, Julian?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked glass. "Why, Seraphina?" It was a question that hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain and a universe of what-ifs. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world, looking down at his own hands, hands that had once held another woman, hands that had inadvertently brought such devastation to their door. The question, he knew, had been inevitable. It had gnawed at him, a constant, corrosive presence for months. "I was foolish, Clara," he began, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was achingly real. "So incredibly, arrogantly foolish. I got swept up in ego, I suppose. in the cheap thrill of something new, something illicit. I let my ambition, my vanity, the absurd belief that I could somehow control everything, overshadow the simple, profound truth that I already had everything I ever wanted, everything I ever truly needed, right here in front of me, with you. His confession, raw and unvarnished, was a start. But could words ever truly mend such a profound breach? She studied him then, her pale blue eyes, shadowed with pain but clear with an unnerving perception, searching his. There was a profound sadness in her gaze, but also perhaps the faintest flicker of empathy? Or was it just exhaustion? "I'm trying to forgive you, Julian," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. "For Alara's sake, our baby's sake. I'm trying. But it's not easy. And how could it be? Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination." "I know," he replied, his own voice raw. "I don't expect it to be. And I swear to you, Clara, I am willing to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to even begin to earn back a fraction of your trust." They spent long, quiet evenings in conversation, the raw edges of their pain slowly, painstakingly, being smoothed by the tentative balm of shared vulnerability. Sometimes they discussed the affair, Julian answering her questions with a brutal, unflinching honesty that was, in itself, a form of penance. Other times, they reminisced about happier, simpler days, their voices soft with nostalgia for a time before the serpent had entered their garden. Their emotional connection was fragile, like a priceless porcelain vase that had been shattered into 1,000 pieces and was now being meticulously, agonizingly glued back together. It would never be entirely whole again, its surface forever marred by the intricate network of cracks. Yet it was, against all odds, still holding shape. A testament, perhaps, to the resilience of something that once was. Clara, with a quiet strength that surprised even herself, made it unequivocally clear that Julian had to attend therapy, both individual and couples counseling, to address the deep-seated impulses, the character flaws that had led to his infidelity. Julian, without a moment's hesitation, agreed. He enrolled in intensive sessions, baring his soul to strangers, excavating the dark, uncomfortable truths he had kept buried for so long. And gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, Clara began to see glimpses of the man she had first fallen in love with, the man she had married. Compassionate, dedicated, and profoundly, genuinely remorseful. Was this the real Julian emerging, or a man desperate for redemption? Time, as always, would tell. Julian, in turn, dialed back his once all-consuming involvement in Thorne Industries, handing over much of the day-to-day operational management to a trusted, long-serving CEO. His focus, he declared, was now singular: Clara's recovery, and being present for every prenatal checkup, every milestone, as they nervously, hopefully, prepared for their baby's arrival. The relentless glare of media attention, however, did not subside entirely. Paparazzi still swarmed whenever Clara, looking increasingly frail but always dignified, left Shadowwood Manor for her appointments with Dr. Ainsworth. Yet Julian and Clara, united in this at least, chose not to release any official statements. They needed, to heal in private. Support arrived in unexpected forms. Damien Vance, the man who had unwittingly introduced Julian to Serafina, reached out to Clara with a heartfelt handwritten letter, apologizing profusely. Annalise Finch, Clara's former assistant, tendered her resignation, her letter filled with shame. Clara and Julian, however, in a surprising act of compassion, refused to accept it, offering her support instead. A small, intimate circle of Clara's closest friends organized a private baby shower. It was a subdued, gentle affair. Clara's face lit up as she opened gifts of tiny clothes and baby books. Her hand drifted protectively to her belly. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of hope. Yes, her world had been turned upside down, but new life beckoned. When the news of Serafina Dubois's sentencing, 15 years, finally broke, it was both a relief and a somber reminder. For Julian, nightmares of that birthday party became a frequent torment. Therapy helped, but the scars remained. As Clara's due date approached, Dr. Ainsworth recommended an induced labor. One crisp, early winter morning, Clara's contractions began. Julian was by her side. The labor was long, arduous, but at the end of it, as a watery winter sun broke through, Clara Thorne gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl, whom they named Alara Rose Thorne. The moment Alara let out her first lusty cry, both Clara and Julian broke down. tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. This tiny child, so fiercely wanted, so nearly lost, represented a second chance, a fresh start. In the days that followed, Julian doted on his wife and newborn daughter, the love that swelled in his chest a new, humbling sensation. The dark shadow of Serafina felt distant, though it would always linger, a cautionary tale. By the time Clara and baby Alara returned to Shadowwood Manor, the grand house felt transformed. The magnificent nursery became the new, vibrant heart of the estate. Laughter, soft and nurturing, returned. One late afternoon, as Julian cradled a sleeping Alara, Clara watched him from the doorway. She saw the unguarded tenderness in his eyes, the awe. The man who had once hidden behind extravagance now seemed humbled, grounded by fatherhood. In that quiet moment, Clara took a tentative step towards forgiveness. "I don't know if our love will fully recover, Julian," she whispered later, her voice laced with a fragile hope. "But for Alara, I'm willing to try." They decided they would not let Serafina's actions define them. The memory of that poisoned tea became a reminder to never again take their bond for granted. Julian worked quietly with philanthropic organizations, supporting women and children in crisis. Clara found new purpose, speaking discreetly about overcoming betrayal. And so, life at Shadowwood Manor continued. The gates remained grand, but beyond them lay a family that had weathered a horrific storm, finding an authentic wealth in the love that had almost been lost, now rediscovered in the gentle coos of their newborn Alara. While illusions had indeed shattered, hope, fragile yet tenacious, had, against all odds, begun to bloom in the very cracks of a broken life. So the story has come to a close. And now, to our amazing friends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with us until this very moment, then something in this story must have touched your heart, stirred a memory, or maybe even mirrored a chapter of your own life. And that means we're already connected, in a quiet but powerful way. Let's take a moment, not to judge what's right or wrong, but to see through a different lens. One that simply asks, what can we learn from this? This story isn't just about betrayal, manipulation, or the courtroom twist. It's about clarity, about the quiet power of self-worth, and the strength to walk away from what no longer respects your light. Clara's journey reminds us, healing often begins the moment we stop begging for validation and start choosing ourselves. The Stoics taught us that we cannot control what others do, only how we respond. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That's the lesson here. Clara didn't just survive, she transformed. And you can too. Life may throw its darkness at you, but you still get to choose your next move. So if this story moves something in you, even just a little, share it with someone who might need a moment of clarity today, and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we walk through them with you. Together. One truth at a time. And if no one's told you lately, you deserve a love that doesn't ask you to prove your worth. Let this be your reminder. We'll see you in the next one.